One small act of kindness in a quiet restaurant changed the life of a disabled boy, the hearts of everyone around him forever. It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening. The restaurant was quiet, with soft golden lights and the faint sound of background music. At one of the corner tables, a man in an expensive suit sat across from his young son. The man was well known to many, a billionaire whose name often appeared in magazines and newspapers, but tonight he wanted nothing more than peace. He came to this place often because it was private and because the staff respected his space. His son sat in a wheelchair beside him. The boy was frail, with soft brown hair that fell slightly into his eyes. His small hands rested on the arms of the chair, his legs covered by a blanket. He hardly spoke when they went out, always nervous around strangers, always feeling different. The father loved his son deeply, but he often felt helpless. He was a man used to solving problems with money, yet money could not heal his boy's body, nor could it give him confidence. The father ordered their meal while checking his phone. As always, messages from his office kept coming. Deals, meetings, contracts, things that seemed urgent but meant nothing in this quiet space. He scrolled through them while his son remained silent. Staring across the room, in the corner of the restaurant stood a polished piano. Its surface reflected the lights, and though no one was playing it, it seemed to call to the boy. He couldn't take his eyes off it. His fingers twitched slightly as if imagining the keys beneath them. He had heard piano music before his late mother used to play for him at home when he was very little. But since her passing, the sound had become only a memory. The father didn't notice his son's gaze. He was too busy responding to emails. The boy sighed softly, wishing, just for once, he could touch the keys and make music like his mother once did. But the idea of asking felt impossible. He was trapped in a body that didn't always obey him, and he was afraid of embarrassing himself in front of strangers. A young waitress walked past their table, balancing a tray of glasses. She was tired, her feet aching from the long shift. But she always carried a kind smile. When she noticed the boy, she stopped. His eyes were fixed so intently on the piano that she followed his gaze. "You like music?" she asked gently, leaning down a little so she wouldn't startle him. The boy's cheeks turned pink. He nodded, but very faintly, almost as if he was afraid to admit it. The father looked up briefly, gave a polite smile to the waitress, and returned to his phone. He had no idea how much that simple question meant to his son. The waitress tilted her head, watching the boy's expression. She could see the longing in his eyes. It reminded her of herself when she was younger, staring at pianos she couldn't afford to play. "Would you like to try?" she whispered with a grin, nodding toward the piano. The boy's eyes widened, filled with both excitement and fear. He glanced at his father, waiting for permission, but the father frowned slightly. "That's not necessary," he said in a firm but polite tone. "He can't really," his voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. He didn't want his son to be embarrassed, to struggle in front of people. Thought he was protecting him. The waitress, however, saw something else. She saw a boy desperate to be given a chance. She crouched beside him, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I think you can," she said softly. "Do you want to help you?" For a moment the boy sat frozen. Then he gave the smallest nod, his eyes shining. The waitress placed her tray aside, then looked at the father again. He seemed uncertain, but he didn't stop her this time. Maybe curiosity held him back. Maybe he wondered what she would do. "Okay, sweetheart," she said to the boy. "I'll help you to the piano." With gentle care, she unlocked the straps on his wheelchair, slid one arm under his shoulders and another beneath his legs. She was not strong, but she lifted with all her heart, careful not to hurt him. Slowly, she carried him across the room, toward the piano. The restaurant had grown quiet. People noticed. Forks paused halfway to mouths, conversations softened, and all eyes turned toward the scene. Some whispered, wondering what was happening. The waitress placed the boy on the piano bench, steadying him with one arm while adjusting his posture. With the other, he looked nervous, his hands trembling as they hovered above the keys. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered. "Just try." The boy pressed a single key. A soft note echoed across the room. His lips parted in surprise. He pressed another, then another. A melody began, uneven at first, familiar to him, something he had practiced at home when no one was watching. The father's head lifted from his phone at the sound. His eyes widened in shock. He hadn't known his son could play even a little. He had never seen him try. The boy continued, his small fingers stumbling over the keys, yet managing to form a tune. His face lit up with pure joy. He wasn't thinking about the people watching, or about his wheelchair, or about being different. For the first time in a long while, he simply felt free. The waitress stayed close, ready to catch him if he slipped, but she never touched the keys. She let him own the moment. Around the restaurant, people grew still. Some had tears in their eyes as they listened to the fragile but heartfelt music. There was something magical in it, not the sound itself, but the courage behind it. The father's throat tightened. He felt guilt pierce through him. But why hadn't he encouraged this before? Why had he assumed his son couldn't, instead of believing he might? When the boy finished, silence hung in the air for a moment, and then the room erupted in gentle applause. Diners clapped softly, smiling warmly at the boy. The boy looked around, shocked. Then he laughed a clear, bright sound his father hadn't heard in years. His cheeks glowed with pride. The waitress carefully lifted him again, holding him as if he were the most precious thing in the world, and returned him to his wheelchair. "See? I told you," she said with a wink. The boy grinned at her, his eyes sparkling with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. She brushed her hands on her apron, smiling as if it were nothing. Then she picked up her tray and went back to work, serving other tables as if the moment hadn't just changed something forever. But at that table in the corner, everything had shifted. The billionaire father sat in silence, watching his son, who was still glowing with happiness. For the first time in years, he saw his boy not as fragile, but as capable. And he knew it wasn't him who had given his son that gift. It was a young waitress with tired eyes and a kind heart. When they left that night, the boy looked at his father and said softly, "Thanks for letting me play." The father couldn't bring himself to admit that he hadn't been the one who let him. His throat was too tight with emotions. Instead, he placed a hand on his son's shoulder and simply nodded. But inside he knew a stranger had just done for his son what he himself had failed to do, and that thought would stay with him long after they left the restaurant. The next evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. Soft chatter filled the air, glasses clinked, and the smell of warm food drifted from the kitchen. The same billionaire father and his son sat at their usual table. This time the boy's eyes were brighter. His face still carried the glow of the night before. He kept glancing at the piano in the corner. Each time, his small hands twitched on the arms of his wheelchair as if remembering the keys. The waitress noticed. She remembered the joy in his eyes when he had played, and the surprise on his father's face. Something about the moment had stayed with her too. She walked past them, smiling at the boy. "You want to try again?" she whispered. The boy nodded eagerly, but this time he didn't even look at his father for permission. He felt a new kind of courage. His father hesitated, his lips parting as if to say no, but the look in his son's eyes stopped him. He sighed softly, then gave a small nod. That was all the boy needed. The waitress placed her tray aside and came to him. With gentle arms, she lifted him once more, carrying him carefully across the room to the polished piano. People began to notice again, recognizing the little boy from the night before. Conversations slowed, eyes followed, and the air shifted. With curiosity, the boy sat on the piano bench, his small legs dangling, his hands trembling above the keys. He took a deep breath. The waitress crouched beside him and whispered, "You can do this. Don't worry about anyone else. Just play for yourself." Her words steadied him. He pressed the first key, then another. The notes came slowly at first, uneven and shaky. But then something changed. His fingers began to move with more confidence. He was remembering the song he had practiced at home in secret, a tune he had picked up from listening to old recordings his mother once loved. The melody flowed, still imperfect, but strong. The boy's face lit up as the music filled the room. His shoulders relaxed, his head tilted slightly. and his entire body seemed alive in a way it hadn't been in years. The diners grew silent again. Forks rested on plates. A couple at a nearby table reached for each other's hands, touched by the fragile yet determined notes. A woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin. The boy didn't notice. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about who was watching. He was lost in the sound of the piano. At the table, his father sat frozen. He stared at his son, unable to believe what he was hearing. All these years he had assumed his boy was too weak, too fragile, too limited to try something like this. And yet here he was, playing a song with a look of pure joy. The father felt a sting of shame in his chest. He had been wrong, terribly wrong. The boy's small body swayed gently with the rhythm. His eyes shone as he pressed each key, almost as if his mother's spirit was guiding his hands. It was clumsy at times, but it was music real, beautiful music. And it came from his son. When the final note rang out, silence hung in the air for a heartbeat, as though no one wanted to break the magic. Then the room erupted in warm applause. People smiled, clapped, even whistled softly. Some rose to their feet in admiration of the boy's courage. The boy looked around in shock. He had never received applause in his life. He had never been the center of attention for something good. His cheeks flushed, his eyes widened, and then he laughed a free, bubbling laugh that filled the restaurant with more warmth than the music itself. The waitress beamed at him. "See, I told you," she whispered, patting his shoulder gently. Carefully, she lifted him back into his wheelchair. He still seemed dazed, as though he couldn't believe what had just happened. "Thank you," he whispered again, his voice trembling with gratitude. The waitress only smiled and brushed it off. "You did it yourself," she said softly, then returned to her work as though she hadn't just changed a boy's life. The billionaire sat in silence, watching his son glow with pride. His chest tightened with emotions he couldn't name, shame for not believing, awe at what he had witnessed, and deep gratitude toward the young woman who had seen what he himself had missed. When they left the restaurant that night, the boy wouldn't stop talking. For the first time, his words tumbled out quickly, filled with excitement. "Did you hear them, Dad? They clapped for me. Didn't think I could do it, but I did. She helped me, and I played, and people liked it." The father nodded slowly, his throat too tight to speak. He had never seen his son so alive, so happy. "Can I go again next time?" the boy asked eagerly. The father swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Yes," he said softly. "Next time." Deep inside, guilt gnawed at him. But his son had thanked him for letting him play, when in truth, he hadn't given him permission the first time. He had tried to stop it. It was the waitress who had seen the boy's heart, not him. That night, after putting his son to bed, the billionaire sat alone in his study. His phone buzzed with new messages, urgent emails waiting for his reply. He ignored them for once. All he could see in his mind was the image of his son's small hands on the piano keys, the light in his eyes, and the waitress crouching beside him with gentle encouragement. He realized something he hadn't wanted to admit before: all his wealth, his power, his business victories, they meant nothing compared to the sound of his son's laughter. And he hadn't been the one to bring it back. It was a waitress working long shifts, tired feet and calloused hands, who had given his son hope, and that thought kept him awake long into the night. The very next afternoon, the billionaire returned to the restaurant, but this time he came alone. His son was at home resting, and for once, the father had chosen not to go into the office. Instead, he sat quietly at one of the corner tables. Waiting. He wasn't there for food or business. He was there for the young waitress who had changed everything for his son. When she finally appeared, carrying her tray of drinks for another table, he raised his hand slightly to call her over. She seemed surprised to see him without the boy, but she approached with her usual warm smile. "Good afternoon, sir," she said politely. "Will your son be joining you today?" "Not today," the father replied. His voice was calm, almost hesitant. "I wanted to speak with you, if you have a few minutes." Linked, clearly not used to customers asking about her time. "Of course," she said softly, setting her tray down and pulling out a chair. For a moment, the billionaire didn't know where to begin. He had spent the night thinking about his son's happiness, about the light in his eyes after touching the da-da-da-da-da piano. It had been the waitress who had made that possible. He cleared his throat, searching for words. "My son," he began slowly, "I've never seen him so. Alive, what you did for him, helping him to the piano, encouraging him. I don't think you realize how much that meant?" The waitress lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushing slightly. "It was nothing," she said. "Just needed someone to believe in him." The billionaire leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. "It wasn't nothing. I've been his father for years, and I never thought to give him that chance. You saw? Something I didn't. That means everything." Her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap. She wasn't used to such attention, especially from someone like him. She was just a waitress, after all, working long hours to pay bills.
Oh.
She didn't think lifting a boy to a piano would matter this much. The father noticed her unease and decided to ask about her. "Tell me," he said gently. "What's your story? Why are you here? I can see you're not like everyone else. You noticed my son when no one else did? That tells me something about you." The waitress hesitated, biting her lip.
Ow!
Sure, if she should share her personal life with a rich stranger. But something in his eyes made her feel safe, so she spoke. "I used to play piano," she admitted softly. "When I was younger, I trained every day. My dream was to go to music school, but life doesn't always go the way you plan." The voice grew quieter as she continued. "My mother got sick. Bills piled up. I had to leave school and start working. I take every shift I can, no mornings, nights, weekends. Between rent, hospital visits, and food, there's not much room left for dreams. But I never stopped loving music. I just don't get to play anymore." The father listened intently. Her words cut into him more deeply than he expected. Here was a woman with nothing, no wealth, no privilege, yet she still carried music in her heart. She had given his son the one thing he, with all his money, had never given: hope. "You sacrificed a lot," he said quietly. She shrugged with a small smile. "Everyone sacrifices something. It just depends on what's important to you." The father was silent for a long moment. He was thinking about his own sacrifices. He had given up time with his son for business meetings, trips, and endless deals. He had thought money could make up for everything. But in truth, he had been losing the most precious thing of all, moments like the one his son had at the piano. "You should know," he said carefully. "Your kindness didn't just give my son joy. It opened my eyes too." The waitress gave him a curious look but didn't reply. He decided not to reveal everything just yet. But quietly in his heart, he had already made a decision. He had enough resources to change her life. He could make sure she never had to worry about rent or bills or her mother's care again. But if he told her now, she might refuse. She seemed too proud, too humble. Instead, he planned to help her quietly, without her knowing. "Would you consider something?" he asked suddenly. "What is it?" she replied. "My son. Oh, he hasn't stopped talking about the piano since that night. I think he's discovered something important. I want him to keep learning. Would you consider teaching him? Just privately. Maybe at our home, or wherever you're comfortable. You could be his teacher." The waitress blinked, stunned. "Me. Teach him, yes," the billionaire said firmly. "He trusts you. He listens to you. I can see it. It's you. Gave him courage I couldn't. I want you to guide him." Her heart raced. She had never thought of herself as a teacher. She had only played for herself, and it had been years since she practiced properly. "I don't know if I'm good enough," she said hesitantly. "You're good enough," he said with certainty. "Sometimes teaching isn't about skill. It's about belief. And you already gave him that." The waitress looked down, torn between her responsibilities and her heart. She needed the extra income, yes, but more than that, she remembered the look on the boy's face when he touched the keys. That joy reminded her of her younger self, before life became so heavy. "All right," she said softly. "If he wants me to, I'll teach him." The billionaire smiled, a rare, genuine smile that even surprised him. "Thank you," he said simply. When he left the restaurant that day, he walked differently. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a father who had been given a second chance, not only for his son, but for himself. That night, he began making calls. Quietly, without mentioning her name, he arranged for her rent to be covered. He contacted a hospital administrator and ensured her mother's medical bills would be cleared. He moved carefully so she wouldn't know yet. He didn't want her to feel pity or charity. He wanted her to accept his help naturally when the time was right. Meanwhile, the boy was thrilled when his father told him about the lessons. His face lit up as if Christmas had arrived early. "She's going to teach me?" "Really? The waitress?" "Yes," his father said softly, watching his son's joy with mixed emotions. He realized he had not seen his boy this excited in years. Next week, the waitress arrived at their home for the first lesson. She was nervous, standing at the door of the billionaire's grand house with her simple bag over her shoulder. She had never stepped into a place like this before. Chandeliers sparkled above her head, and the walls were lined with paintings that looked too expensive to touch. She felt out of place, but when she saw the boy's excited face, her nerves melted. "Are you ready?" she asked with a smile. "Yes," he said eagerly, wheeling himself toward the piano in the living room. And so, the lessons began. The lessons started slowly, but they quickly became the best part of the boy's week.
Ow.
Every time the waitress walked through the grand doorway of the billionaire's house, the boy's face lit up as if sunshine had filled the room. He would be waiting near the piano, his wheelchair already turned toward it, his small hands twitching with eagerness to begin. The waitress always greeted him with a warm smile. She didn't carry fancy books or complicated sheets of music. She only brought her patience and kindness. She started with simple exercises, teaching him how to place his hands, how to move his fingers more smoothly, and how to listen to the rhythm inside the notes. She never rushed him. Every mistake was met with gentle encouragement. The boy loved it. His laughter often echoed through the house whenever he pressed the wrong key or mixed up a melody. She laughed with him instead of correcting him harshly. Slowly, his confidence grew. Where once his fingers shook with fear, now they began to move with curiosity. The billionaire father often stood nearby, watching quietly. At first, he didn't know what to do. He wasn't used to being part of something so simple, so ordinary. He was a man who moved in the world of numbers and power. But here, in his own living room, he saw something far more powerful than any deal he had ever signed. He saw his son becoming alive, note by note, under the gentle guidance of a young woman who believed in him. Sometimes the father would sit behind them, pretending to read a document, but his eyes always drifted back to the piano. He noticed the way the waitress leaned down to whisper encouragement, the way she clapped softly when the boy completed a song, the way she celebrated small victories as if they were the greatest achievements in the world. He also noticed something else. His son was changing. The boy sat taller in his wheelchair. His voice grew stronger, his laughter louder. He began asking more questions, not only about the piano, but about everything. He wanted to learn. He wanted to try. And with each lesson, his world grew bigger. The billionaire realized something painful. He had been so busy building empires that he had almost let his son's spirit fade. It took a waitress, someone who had nothing compared to him, to bring that spirit back. Weeks passed and the lessons became a routine. The waitress often stayed for dinner afterward. At first she was hesitant. She didn't feel like she belonged at the same table as the billionaire and his son. She felt awkward sitting in a dining room filled with chandeliers and silver cutlery. But the boy always insisted. "Please stay," he would say, tugging at her hand. "It's more fun when you're here." So she stayed. And slowly dinners became filled with laughter. The boy would share stories of what he wanted to play next. The waitress would tell them funny tales from her work at the restaurant. Sometimes the father would even join in, though at first his voice was stiff. Over time, however, he began to relax. He found himself enjoying her stories, enjoying the sound of his son's laughter, enjoying something he had almost forgotten. The feeling of family, but not everyone outside understood. Whispers began to spread. People saw the billionaire spending time with a waitress. They whispered in the restaurant, in the neighborhood, even in his business circles. Why is a man like him spending time with someone like her? They asked. The waitress heard the whispers too. She sometimes felt embarrassed. She told herself she didn't belong in his world. She was just there for the boy, not for the father, not for the mansion, not for the wealth. At night, when she went home to her small apartment and her sick mother, she would remind herself that this was temporary. She was only teaching piano. She couldn't let her heart get involved. But the boy made that impossible. He adored her. He called her his friend, his teacher, even his hero. Whenever she felt like pulling away, his bright smile pulled her back. In one evening, after weeks of practice, the father suggested something surprising. "I think we should arrange a recital," he said. The boy's eyes widened. "A recital? For me?" "Yes," the father said with a small smile. "You've worked hard. You deserve to share it." The boy looked at the waitress, nervous but excited. "Do you think I can do it?" She knelt beside him, her eyes soft. "I don't think," she said gently. "I know." And that was all he needed. In the following days, the house filled with music as the boy practiced. The waitress came. More often, helping him polish the songs he wanted to play. She taught him not just to press the keys, but to tell a story with each note. "Music isn't just sound," she told him. "It's feeling. Play from your heart, not just your fingers." The boy listened. Slowly, his songs began to carry emotions, sometimes light and playful, sometimes soft and sad. The billionaire watched, astonished, as his son poured feelings into the piano that he had never spoken aloud. Finally, the night of the recital arrived. The father had arranged everything with great care. The restaurant where it all began was chosen as the place. He wanted the boy to perform on the same piano where he first found his courage. Friends, family, and even some strangers gathered. The restaurant was filled with warm lights and quiet anticipation. The waitress sat nervously in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt proud of the boy, but also out of place among the wealthy guests. Yet the father had insisted she sit there, telling her she was the one who made this possible. The boy rolled out onto the small stage in his wheelchair, his eyes wide with both fear and excitement. He looked out at the crowd, then at his father, then at the waitress. She gave him a nod and a smile, the same smile that had given him courage. The very first night, he turned to the piano, took a deep breath, and placed his hands on the keys. The first notes rang out, soft and trembling, but steady. The room fell silent. Every ear listened, every heart leaned in. The boy played with all the courage he had, his fingers moving carefully but with passion. Played not only the melody, but the memory of his mother, the encouragement of his teacher, and the pride of his father. The waitress's eyes filled. With tears, she knew how far he had come. She knew this was more than music, it was transformation. When the song ended, the room exploded in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering. The boy looked out in shock again, his cheeks red, his eyes shining. He had done it. He had shared his music, and the world had listened. The father stood too, clapping with tears in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't proud because of business or wealth. He was proud because of his son. That night, as they celebrated, the father realized just how much his life had changed. It wasn't the money, the house, or the business that mattered anymore. It was the sound of his son's music, the laughter at dinner, the presence of a waitress who had become much more than just a teacher. And in his heart, he knew their lives were only just beginning to change. The day of the recital had arrived, and the restaurant was filled with warm light and gentle excitement. Word had spread that the young boy who had touched the piano weeks ago would be performing again, this time with more confidence and skill. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation as guests found their seats, curious to see the boy who had amazed so many before. The boy was nervous. His small hands rested on the arms of his wheelchair, his face pale but eager. The waitress knelt beside him, whispering calm words of encouragement. "You've practiced so hard," she said softly. "Just play from your heart. Everything else doesn't matter." The boy nodded, taking a deep breath. He glanced at his father, sitting a few tables away. For once, the billionaire wasn't checking emails or making calls. He was entirely focused on his son, smiling softly, pride shining from his eyes. That sight gave the boy courage. Slowly, the boy wheeled himself to the piano. The moment he touched the keys, a hush fell over the restaurant. Everyone could feel the importance of what was about to happen. He began with a simple melody, careful and precise. But soon his fingers began to move more freely. The notes filled the room, carrying emotion, memory, and hope. The waitress watched with tears in her eyes. She had never expected to be part of something so magical. She had only wanted to help a boy love music again, never imagining the depth of change that her small act of kindness would create. Every note the boy played seemed to tell a story not only of music, but of courage, love, and trust. As the song continued, the boy's confidence grew. His body swayed slightly with the rhythm, his fingers gliding over the keys with purpose. The audience listened in silence, moved by the performance of someone so young and yet so determined. Some diners whispered, some wiped tears from their eyes, and some simply held their hands together in quiet admiration. The father sat with his hands clasped, feeling an emotion he could not name. He realized that in all his years of wealth and power, he had never witnessed anything so beautiful. Money had given him comfort, influence, and luxury, but it had never brought him this kind of happiness. This happiness came from something far more valuable: his son's joy, his son's courage, and the love and guidance of the woman who had made it possible. The boy's final note lingered in the air, a soft, clear sound that seemed to echo in every heart present. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and smiling. The boy looked around, shocked. He had never experienced anything like this before. The waitress stood in the front row, clapping the hardest, tears running down her cheeks. She couldn't hold back her smile as she watched the boy beam with pride. He had done it. He had shared his gift, his courage, and his joy with the world. The father approached her after the performance, his expression serious but warm. "You did this," he said simply. "You gave him the courage, the guidance, and the belief. Without you, none of this would have been possible." The waitress shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. "He did it himself. I only helped him see that he could try." "No," the father said firmly. "You did more than just help. You changed his life and mine. You gave us something money could never buy. I want to make sure your life changes too." The waitress blinked, unsure what he meant. "I know how hard you've worked, how much you've sacrificed," he continued. "I want to help you pursue your dreams. I want you to go back to music school, to play the piano like you always wanted. You deserve it." Her hands trembled. She had never imagined such a thing. All her life, she had struggled to survive, never expecting anyone to notice her dreams, let alone support them. She tried to refuse, but the father insisted gently. "You've given my son a gift beyond words. Let me give you one in return." The boy, still glowing from his performance, reached out and took her hand. "Please," he said softly. "You helped me. You should get what you want to." The waitress's heart swelled. She realized then that she was not just a helper, not just a teacher, not just a friend. She was family. She had been chosen not because of wealth or status, but because of her heart. Over the next few weeks, the father quietly arranged for her tuition, her living expenses, and her mother's medical care. She could now pursue her dream without the burden of bills or worry. For the first time in years, she could focus entirely on music. The boy continued his lessons with her, growing stronger, more confident, and more joyful each day. But now their relationship had deepened. He didn't just see her as a teacher, he saw her as someone who truly believed in him, someone who had changed his life forever. The father, too, was transformed. He no longer measured success by money or power alone. He learned to see the value of kindness, patience, and encouragement. He had always believed he could provide everything for his son. But he realized now that some things like belief, courage, and love could not be bought. They had to be given from the heart, and the waitress had given them freely. Months later, the boy performed in public again, this time at a small music festival. He played with confidence and joy, dedicating his performance to the waitress who had believed in him first. The audience clapped, cheered, and smiled. The boy's happiness was contagious. After the performance, the father pulled the waitress aside. "Look at him," he said softly. "He's thriving, and it's because of you. You've given him more than music. You've given him hope." The waitress smiled, holding back tears. "And he's given me something too," she said quietly. "He's reminded me why I love music. It's reminded me that dreams are worth pursuing." The father nodded. "We've all changed because of that night at the restaurant. A simple act of kindness can create a ripple bigger than we imagine." That day forward, their lives were intertwined in a way that could not be broken. The boy thrived under the guidance of the waitress, growing not only as a pianist, but as a young person full of courage and hope. The waitress finally pursued her dream, studying music and performing professionally. And the billionaire father, once busy and distant, learned to treasure moments of love, kindness, and family above all else. What had started as a quiet evening in a restaurant, it blossomed into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. One act of kindness, the gentle lifting of a boy to a piano, had transformed 3 lives forever. And as they all sat together one evening, the boy playing a soft melody, the waitress smiling beside him, and the father watching with pride, it became clear that true wealth was not in money, but in love, belief, and the courage to give someone else a chance.